that part, everybody drop back. Right there. Keep playing the chord progression, which is the chorus chord progression. And if you guys get to the end of it before I finish my my spoken word, just ride the G until I come back in. Okay, take it from the solo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Almighty hung on a tree for our transgressions. He set us free. Free from death. Free from sin. Death, where is your sting? Hell, where is your victory? Death is defeated. Hell is defeated. We are free. We are free indeed. I am free to run. I am free to run. I am free to I am free to I am free to live for you. I am free to live for you. I am free. I am free. I am free. I am free to run. I am free to dance. I am free to live for you. I am free to live for you. I am free. I am free. Those the MP3s that are on Planning Center follow these arrangements to the letter. So if you guys have fun practice between now and be your go-to.
Ooh, hot mic. White flight. Yeah, it's not anymore. I don't need it to be that loud. I just need it to be loud there. See that? That's what needs to be loud. I don't really need one for these guys, but it helps a little. I am. I resemble that remark. Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Whoa.
The Bible
Wait a
study.
minute.
I will not be leading it tonight.
There we go. All right. I got stuff. What's up, man? Boom, 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 boom. Steel chair. So I'm going to steal the chair. Huh? Yeah, it's running. It's running. You know, I get chair every once in a while. Whew. Huh?
Got an intermediate chair?
I guess so. It's something that basically keep me calm, keep me seated for a second at least.
I heard you playing Epiphanes.
Dave! What's up, man?
Well, I figured it was you. I figured I just walked in.
You know, it's like, that's right. Yes. You can be if you want. You're in. Anyone's in. As they're wrapping up. Steve, how you feel? Pretty good. Did you enjoy last week? You did? Good. That was good. That's awesome. I'm proud. Steve taught the Sunday morning class last week in the morning. And it's awesome. He did really good. It was fun. Yeah, it was fun. You did a good job. So. This one was interesting this week because I want to ask you guys to help me with something here. We're going to go through We're going to go through a little exercise because I feel that there's something out of this that I'm trying to get, but I can't get. You know, like something's right on the tip of my tongue, but it just won't. It won't. Yes. Yeah, it's all right.
My bad.
No, we're good. You know me. No, there's no shh. There's no shh. We just go. We just talk. There you go. I actually feel like there's something on the tip of my tongue with this. I don't know what it is, and I couldn't quite put it all together. I mean, I put obviously the stuff together, but some of you guys are hopefully, I think you're going to help me on this front with this. So we'll do the quick rundown. It's God's word. Old covenant's old, new covenant's in effect. Christ came, and he's the reason for the season. Nothing new under the sun. I'm not. If I get up here and tell you something brand new that I'm saying, hey, I got a new revelation from God, you might want to walk it. Or throwing lemons. Apparently, I did learn this week. At one point, the high priest was up, and I don't remember when exactly it was, but everybody down in the crowd when the high priest was up there decided it was a good idea that they didn't like him. They were going to throw lemons at him. So they threw lemons at the high priest. The high priest, though, has something called power, and he has guards with swords. And he sent their guard swordsmen and slaughtered people right there in the temple.
Oh my gosh.
Because they threw lemons at him. I did learn that. That is white flight, sir. It was after. I know it was after the exile. I think it was after the Greeks, but it was before Jesus. So it was after Antiochus, Epiphanes, and so forth. But it was before so it's somewhere within 200 years of Jesus that the high priest did that. It might have been pretty soon. It may have been even Caiaphas, but I don't think it was Caiaphas. I think it was somebody before Caiaphas. So it was just a random thing that I heard, but it's going to play a little bit of a role. I'm not saying that's going to play a role, but yeah, I heard it on the internet. It's got to be true, right? I mean, Google told me it, so there you go. God's economy, and I don't know if one point that I've made the whole time is more important than what God sees as important is very different than what we see as important. It just is all the time, in everything, in every way. And I don't know that yeah. So we'll leave that there for a while. Apply Christ in everything. See where grace and truth lie. That may help me today. That may help my thought process today, actually. This is just kind of getting through I do that every time. Hit that button. This was the structure kind of the Gospels that we talked about. We've covered introduction to the Gospels all the way down through the wedding at Cana, which was last week, which was quite interesting. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I keep doing that. Yeah. I wish I could do this every week. But you know what? I learned to go with what God's given me. That's the best way of me putting it. Challenge of time and perspective. We only get snippets of activity in Scripture. There's 24 hours a day, and we just see 5 minutes at a time at best. Our modern mind doesn't comprehend times and challenges of their daily living, their travel. We don't get a lot of those perspectives as we just open up a Bible and read it, so it takes a little bit of effort kind of to think through some of that. Gospel writers had a purpose, and it was not to lay out moment-by-moment details, but to give you events. And what is the purpose of the event?
So that Jesus is Lord.
Jesus is Lord. He's the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and end. He was our everything. So, just again, the picture of the area, just getting an idea from Jerusalem down here, up here to Capernaum, which is kind of the north part of where Jesus would travel. That's going to play a part in today, kind of in the opening of what I'm saying, because they go to Capernaum from Cana, which is a pretty quick trip. I mean, quick trip relatively, right? Relatively quick. And then they go, in the text it says, now they go down to Jerusalem for the Passover. Okay? We're going to get a little bit into a little bit of this, but so that's the 60, 70 miles that's here. What's the other fact that happens between here and Jerusalem in terms of travel? What would make it even more difficult? Robbers, that's one thing. That's true. Samaria, they would go around Samaria. Okay, what'd you say? Not just hills. What altitude was Jerusalem sitting at? They're sitting about 3,000 feet above sea level. There are moments when they get around, especially the Dead Sea and so forth, they're sitting down 600 feet below sea level. So if you think about it, this is about, in terms of what you think in terms of elevation, this is some elevation changes that happen in the Grand Canyon, right? So that if anybody ever talks about saying, hey, they traveled from up here to Jerusalem, how did they describe it in the Bible? Do you know? They traveled up to Jerusalem. Now, our modern minds think up is north. We do the north thing. But they're actually traveling south when they go to Jerusalem. So they go up to Jerusalem, meaning Jerusalem was at a much higher elevation than the areas that were around them. In elevation. So if you ever read the text, and I think it even says in this one, I'm not sure, but going up to Jerusalem, when it says they traveled up to Jerusalem, and almost always they're talking about coming from this area here to Jerusalem, going up, because elevation. And if you think about Grand Canyon type elevation, there's likely some switchbacks in here. They're obviously not just going straight up in that range. There's an up and a down and an oval around and everything else. I just got my flashback to hiking the Grand Canyon, and I just got a little funky there. So that's it. The songs of it. That was good. I like that. Number of psalms. There were songs of ascent, because they would sing them as they went up to Jerusalem. Like I said, our modern minds think north. When we think up, we're going to go up to Flagstaff, and that is actually even higher elevation, but a lot of times we'll go up to Utah, or we'll go up to Montana, but in their case, up north and south didn't really mean anything. And I'm probably the reason we say up is because of a map, right? I mean, we position, maps are important to us, and we see everything up as north on a map. Well, I don't know how many maps existed back then, or how many people actually had even access to maps that. Right. I mean, this wasn't like they had, Xeroxes and copy machines and MapQuest. MapQuest is great. MapQuest is great, right? But not for them. So there we go. All right. Some of the introduction there. Purpose of John's specific testimony, so we may believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that's where we're going to be. So let's open to John John chapter 2. I'm going to read the passage first, and then we're going to do some digging because I need help digging here. My brain, actually 12 through 22, I believe. We're basically doing 12 through 22. And we're going to hang out here for a while because there's something here. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm missing it, but I think there's something more here that I'm not. After this, he went down to Capernaum. From Cana. Cana was south. Went down to Capernaum because Capernaum was sitting by the lake, by the Sea of Galilee. I don't want to say lake, but Sea of Galilee, which was down even further below sea level. Okay? And he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. I want to stop and do everything, but I'll do that later. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through the reading first, and then we're going to get to the stuff. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those that were selling oxen, sheep, and doves, and money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins and the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for my house will consume me." The Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews said to him, "It took 46 years to build the temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast of many believed in his name, observing the signs which he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men, and because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man. Okay, that's our text. I want to start this. Again, we tend to read the passage, yes, great, and then we move on, or we do a little bit of thought about it and so forth. So I want to start with, what do we know about the temple? What do we know about the temple? I need something to write with here. And I pulled 3 markers because we're going to find out which one works better. Black does not work real well. Trash. Okay, that's a close marker. Okay. Okay, here we go. And that's why we're going to get here. Let's do a brief history. This is the Hitchhiker's Guide to Humanity. Okay? Hitchhiker's Guide to Humanity. God created the heavens and the earth. He created Adam and Eve, right? And mankind, they sinned. It broke relationship with God. They're put out of the Garden of Eden. That the nature, everything was cursed because of this. Specifically, Adam. Actually read it today, interestingly, or yesterday. Because of your sin, I will curse the ground that you're on. You will, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to be pulling food from the ground, Adam. This is not going to be easy for you. And we've been basically having to work hard to survive ever since. It was not just, the idea was in the Garden of Eden, food, shelter, the atmosphere or the environment was very easy to live in. The harsh weather conditions that we experience, the seasonalities and things we got to prepare for, the way we have to gather our food, store it, and or it spoiled. All of those things were not something that Adam and Eve in the garden had to deal with. Life was pretty good. Actually, life was real good. Once that was broken, the way we see humanity began to exist, okay? They had kids. There is a passage, though, that was interesting, and it gets to where I want to go. One of the places I want to, and I just happened to, again, read it today because I was reading my little readings things today, and this popped out at me. Genesis, I want to say 4, The very end of 4. I have the NASB. Who has something that's not kind of old King James or that's more or less 6:4? I want to know Genesis 4:28. Okay, 28. 26. Eyesight, little bitty print. 4:26. Okay. In mine, this is the NASB, it says, to Seth him a son was born. He called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. What'd yours say?
He says, Seth also fathered a son whom he named Enos. At that time, profaning the name of the Lord began.
Interesting. Okay, profaning. You have, what's yours say?
Mine says, at that time, men began to invoke the Lord by name.
Invoke the Lord by name. The one I read today was the one that triggered my mind. You have your computer up. So go to the New Living Translation, the NLT. And this is what sparked me because the NLT, these kind. Do you see the difference in the translations? Yours actually got almost, I didn't even know that one, but that was like they almost made a profane name towards him. This just said they began to call upon the name of the Lord. Yours kind of insinuated similarly. But the New Living Translation gave me something today which says what? Say it again, just the last part.
Upon the name of the Lord.
What does, they began to what?
And then began to call upon the name of the Lord. Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
NLT. Yep, you got it. And by that time, people began to worship the Lord by name. ISV. This is the one that Josh uses in his notes. Okay? We'll swear by his name and so forth, but even there, this version here says basically, and I think the definition of the word is a key here. We've probably redefined the word a little bit when we say that word because we think profane necessarily, but that may be a proclaim or something of that nature. I don't know. I know this, the translators of this version and moving on, then men begin to call upon the name of the Lord is what and NASB is kind of a word for word. So my point here is this. Let's think about how men had worshiped God before Moses. Okay? Before Moses. Because what did Moses do? Moses on Sinai, what does Moses do? He gets the law. He gets Leviticus, Deuteronomy, right? What is contained in Leviticus and Deuteronomy?
All the sacrifices.
Okay? 10 Commandments. Actually, no. Where's the 10 Commandments? Incorrect. They are in there, but where are they first? Nope. Nope. Exodus 20. Exodus 20, actually. Exodus 20. So the 10 Commandments first arrived to us in Exodus in the history. Now, I'm not saying that was the first written by anybody's stretch of the imagination. I have no idea. But Exodus actually gives us the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20. Deuteronomy follows up with them, and then much more of the law and so forth. And then you have Leviticus and so forth, okay? So, which one?
Did men begin to call on the name of the Lord?
Basically, my point here is men didn't really know how to worship the Lord or didn't have real instruction on how to do it. He walked and talked with Adam and Eve. He had conversation with Cain, with Abel. People, Noah, he had conversations with. So there's some different way in which God was interacting with mankind then. And man still rejected him, pretty much all of them except 8, so to speak, right? So, but I found it interesting today that I found this because I read it in the New Living Translation. I was saying, men first began to worship God by calling on his name after, and this actually was after Seth had grown up. So there had been a 200-year period of time that happened between Adam and Eve and here before this is something that happened. So my point here is this. Worship of God was pretty chaotic, is a good word maybe. Not written in stone. He didn't come down with the stone tablets and so forth. And as they went on, and less people actually did any worship of God whatsoever. Basically, you get to Noah, and you got Noah and his wife, Shem, Ham, Chem, Shep, Larry Moe, Larry Moe Curly, but then and their family, and that's the only family left. And God says, I'm destroying everybody but you guys. Okay? Now, when I don't have any text on this, but just from memory, when Noah gets off the ark, what's one of the first things that he does? Offers a sacrifice. So some form of sacrificial system had been put into place, or they at least had some understanding of what it was. We don't know exactly the form of it. We don't know all of the things that had to do with it. But he certainly knew enough at this point to say, hey, it's time to offer some sacrifices. And God actually had him bring some extra animals onto the ark in order to be able to sacrifice those animals when it was done. So there was something put into place here. But we know all of this is through basically word of mouth. And we know kind of what happens in the word of mouth, right? We play the game of telephone. It becomes something that becomes something that becomes something. That actually will play a role in our story here today of the word of mouth thing that happened with the story that we're talking about here, because the game of telephone, or intentionally or unintentionally, happens. So worship of God now continues on from Noah's here, and we get all the way up to Abraham. Okay? And again, mankind is not great at following God, would we say? I mean, Abraham's pretty much it. You've got basically maybe, what was it from? They want to say that Noah may have been alive when Abraham was born, and Abraham lived till he was 200. So that means that there was maybe 300 years that existed from the time that Noah was done to the time that Abraham kind of was doing his thing. So 300 years, humankind's coming together. The major event that happens during that time is Tower of Babel.
When Abraham was young, he had 10 ancestors all still living. Yes,
because they were living that long of time. He had 10 generations that still were alive when Abraham was born. Okay? But at the same time, here's the interesting part about that. The world populates real quickly when you have people living that long. Like exponentially. Like a single couple have many, 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 many kids. And those many, many, many kids go to have many, many, many other kids with other, in just 10 generations, 8 people can bring about thousands simply by the law of exponentiality. As you go 2, become 2, become 2, become 2, you do it by and anything exponential at that point is. We're assuming. I mean, there's some assumptions there. No, you can't use. I'll just give you, for exponentiality, do you guys know ServSafe, which is the standard for which you do food handling? The official ServSafe rule is if you've prepared food from the time it's gone from its hot place to being out for service, how long do you have? No. I'm talking, how long do you have to serve that food before you have to either put it back into heat or cold or do something with it? 4 hours. So if you have food out in a buffet, if you have food out ready to serve somebody, not on a hot plate or not being refrigerated, do you understand what I'm saying? Right, nothing to it. Like when you go to Golden Corral, the stuff's still on heat, so they have some extra time. They built time in there because they provide heat, or they provide cold, so because it's something cold. But if you have no other, the term is 4 hours. Do you know why 4 hours? Because bacteria double every 20 minutes. Okay? Bacteria double every 20 minutes. Now here's the thing. In 4 hours, that's 2 to the 24th. Do 2 to the 24th power. Do 2 to the 24th power. Okay? So if you do 2 to the 24th power, I think you come up over 1 million. I think it's like 1,000,006. So in 4 hours, 2 bacteria, 16 million. In 4 hours, 2 bacteria can become 16 million bacteria, which is why you can't have food not on some kind of thing for more than 4 hours. Now, take that kind of math and take humans procreating. Do you see what I'm saying? So in a very short period of time, in a 300 period of time, there's probably millions of people on the earth at this point, even though they've only come from technically 8 people. Okay? So the world's populating rather rapidly. There are a lot of people around. You have the Tower of Babel event happen, which basically then had a bunch of people at it, and God separated everybody. God said, everybody, get your language, get your culture, because I'm not letting you get together again. And there's reason behind that. As mankind came together, that's one of the great fallacies, I think, of the one world government of this. Actually, I'm actually thinking. I don't know. One of my sermons I have in my head is I'm gonna do the song of the two Imagines. And the two Imagines. Imagine from John Lennon, and then I Can Only Imagine by, do you see? And I'm gonna contrast and compare the two. It's a thought I had, just a sermon idea. Anyway, but in the song Imagine by John Lennon, imagine there's no heaven, imagine just this world where everybody lives together. Guys, we tried it, we did it. It was Babel. It was bad. It didn't work real well. And God said, in order for humankind to work, I need to separate them. I need them to get into tribes and cultures and different things just so that they can exist for a period of time. Because
They all have one language. If you have one language, you become much more efficient at doing good and doing evil.
in doing evil. And the problem was they were much better at doing evil than they were doing good.
And it's much easier for one person or one small group to control everybody.
Yes.
That's a bad thing.
Yes, it's a bad thing too. So Babel happened, but then we get to Abraham. And Abraham is a man of faith, and God says, okay, God, I'm going to use you, Abraham, because of your faith, and makes Abraham a promise. He promises him what? Descendants being numerous as the stars and the sand, all right? What else? What other promises were made to Abraham? Huh? They were going to go to the promised land, and his offspring is going to do what? His seed, and this goes to Paul, his seed is going to basically save the world. Is going to be, for all intents and purposes, his seed is going to be the savior of the world, and it is the context what it is. So those are kind of the 3 promises made to Abraham. So Abraham goes through and even has, and there's some sacrificial stuff that comes with Abraham. He went to go sacrifice who? Isaac, his son, because God said so, and he said, I'm going to do it. So there's some sacrificial system here. But from even that time all the way through to till the people of Israel leave Egypt, worship is word of mouth. Worship is tradition. Worship is the telephone game, right? Because we know, do you guys teach the same things to your kids as you guys would teach to your kids, as you would teach to your kids, or as you could teach to kids, or anybody? Do any of us teach the same things to any of our kids, even though we kind of claim to have the same stuff? No. Well, neither did they. They didn't at this point. At this point, you're down to Abraham after Babel. And you have intermarrying going on, right? Because Abraham's descendants didn't just marry Abraham's descendants. As we saw, there was Tamar. Tamar was in there. Tamar, produced some fun stuff. Rahab was in. I mean, there are all kinds. There was intermarrying amongst them because they didn't just stay within the family. So all kinds. So God and worship was chaotic. It was at best. There wasn't, and especially when they're now. How long were they in Egypt for? 400 years. How much did they control of their lives in Egypt? Not a whole lot. I mean, they had their own traditions, so to speak, but it was in the context of being slaves to Egypt. But not initially, correct. Initially, they were celebrated coming in. But over time, 400 years, 400 years is a long time. If we think about that, 400 years is even more than the United States has been together. Boy, a part of my problem in going through this is my brain keeps doing that. I keep going there of where are we going? What's going on? Because it it's very difficult to see what's happening now and separate, okay, what I'm learning versus, man, what's going on right now? It's tough, very tough. Okay, so they go all the way to Moses. Moses, they let my people go. They come out of Egypt. They go where? They go out in the desert. Where do they end up in the desert? Mount Sinai. What happens at Mount Sinai? The law is given, and what's established at Mount Sinai? Where? Tabernacle. The traveling thing, right. Okay? What do we know about the tabernacle? I like that. That's probably the best. Oh. Me and this thing. I'm going to stop. Down. Stay. Okay. What do we know? We know a lot. That may be the best answer that we know a lot about the tabernacle. Why? It was spelled out. So what do we know about tabernacle? We know dimensions, materials, who did what, all over the place, right? Objects, elaborate detail. I'm just going to say elaborate detail. And with that was involved in the law and everything that was going on. So all of a sudden, this chaotic structure of what had been passed down generation to generation to generation, and even the doubt that had come because the people were at this by the time 400 years existed. What kind of faith did they have in? What kind of faith did they have that God was going to actually let them go, right? So all of that comes down to, and then God says, "Come here." And he lays down very specific acts of worship, specific ways, the law. He finally gives them, this is the way you are to worship me. That's why that verse strung out to me so much, because that was the first time they worshipped in the Lord's name. That's why that one, because this was where my brain was working, right? So we have the tabernacle. What happened at the tabernacle once it was set up? What things happened at the tabernacle once the tabernacle was set up? Sacrifices would happen. Was the tabernacle the only place sacrifices would happen, though? No, it wasn't. It was important place for some of the high-end sacrifices, and once it was set up, they would do a lot of the sacrifices there because it was right in the center of camp. It would be it once set up and ready to go, it would be the place that you would typically want to take your sacrifices, right? But was the tabernacle always with all the people? Was the tabernacle always with all the people? Knocked down, moved all the time. Now, when they were traveling together, it was with them. But it wasn't, and here's the other side. Once they went into the land of Israel, where'd the people go? Once that past Jericho, once the people started taking over Israel, what happened to the people? What did they do? They started to live. They're here, Jericho, up in Cana, Galilee. They started to spread out all over Israel, right? What happened to the tabernacle? They went to Shiloh. All right. So people had this method of worshiping God here in the tabernacle. But even that, they came up with other forms of sacrifices and sacrificial system they had to do that was not necessarily centered on the tabernacle. They would set up altars. Priests would have to do that, so priests would be established in those areas, but they would find other ways of worship in areas away from the tabernacle, right? You needed to go to the butcher. They were butchers and they were great barbecuers. They could barbecue some meat. They were good at it. I'm just going to say, barbecue was good back then. I don't know what else was good, but barbecue, really good, better than Colt Grill, just saying. Okay, I like me some Colt Grill. So we have the tabernacle and its establishment here. Now, second thing. So from Abraham to Moses, was at least 10 generations. I mean, we're talking, like, isn't it Abraham to David? So that's maybe 8 generations. How many hundreds of years do you think happened between Abraham and Moses? Okay. And then from Moses to them getting into Israel, to them going through to David, right? So that was another 500 years, 400 years-ish, in that range. Okay. What I'm saying is this. Did the people of Israel follow all the rules all the time? Not even close, bud. Okay? Not even close, bud. Oh, yeah, Breakfast Club. Okay. Anyway, had to figure out which quote that was that I was quoting. So there you go. So even in this, even the establishment of the tabernacle and of the system, and even having it written down for them, they instituted all kinds of other things into this. They would stop doing this, most of the sacrifices, right? I mean, you got the times of the judges. What would happen during the judges? They'd go 20 years where they worshiped God pretty good, and the judge came, and then they would not do it, not go for 40 or 50 years, and then God would send a judge to kind of get them back, and they'd come back up, and then there was this cycle in Judges of 10, 15 times where the children of Israel worshiped God and then didn't worship God, and then worshiped God and then didn't worship God. Yes. Okay. No. Okay. Okay. Yes. Correct. Yep. Right. Right. Now, all the way up to what changed about the tabernacle and who changed it? David. Okay? He didn't get to build it. We get to David and we get this great idea. We're no longer going to have a tabernacle. We're going to have a temple. Now, why? Why did David want a temple? I think it's even a little more egotistical than that. Okay? Because in man's, again, this goes back to what I said, right? God's economy versus man's economy. In man's economy, David had established now a pretty solid kingdom. He brought the children of Israel. They've gone through all the trials and tribulations they have. They're in the land of Israel. They've taken it over, but man, they got problems, right? They got issues. There are many warring tribes, the Philistines and the Amalekites and the Amalekites, and you name the kite, and they were Hittites, and they were all warring against Israel constantly, taking over parts of it, and Israel would go back and take over those parts, and they take over other parts. It was a mess. And the children of Israel were doing this seesaw battle with God constantly, and most of the time they were down here and not up here, okay? They wanted to be like the nations. What did the nations have that they didn't have? They had a king. Okay? So, did God institute a king by God's, I'm going to say God's will because all of it's God's will, but I want to say was a king instituted because God ordained a king is what that was supposed to happen? No. The people wanted a king, so God gave them a king. Who did he give them? Saul. Gave them Saul. Saul didn't work out so great. Again, like I said, Hitchhiker's Guide here. I'm not getting into the minutiae detail of it. Saul wasn't so great. So David came along. And over a period of time, David consolidated power, gained a lot of favor with a lot of people, won a lot of battles, had a lot of blood on his hands, actually. If you really go down to it, David killed a lot of people, either by himself or his word killed a lot of people, including Uriah because, he wanted his wife. But other than that small detail, killed tens of thousands. That's awesome. That's a perfect example here. So David and now he has this kingdom, and he wants as any human wants, splendor. Right? So what does he do? Builds a castle. David builds himself a palace. Out of what? No. Cedars from Lebanon, actually, which was Tyre at the time. You side on Tyre, etc. So there was a lot of cedar wood up there, and cedars would have been big, tall trees, good wood. So lots of wood made into this beautiful palace that he had. And David looked down from his palace once it was built. Look at me, look how cool I am. And he looked down and he saw the tent. Saw the tabernacle, because the tabernacle now had been brought to where his palace was and was sitting down in the valley below him. And David went, God shouldn't reside in a tent. He should reside in a palace. Hence his idea of the temple. Now my question is, did God tell David to build a temple? No. It wasn't God's idea. Better yet, did God need a temple? No. He didn't ask for one, and he didn't need one. Who told him that? That God didn't really want him have one. Nathan did. Nathan went in actually, because David went, basically the story goes like this. David comes in, Nathan. Nathan was kind of the priest, prophet, the time. Nathan, got this great idea. Look at all this splendor we got here. Let's make God splendorous. And Nathan's like, that's a good idea. Let's go over here. So they go, Nathan says, okay, that's a good idea. So he kind of goes in and goes into conference with God as the prophet would that night, and came back the next day and went, hey, David, it's not such a great idea. It's not a good idea. No, God not big on that. David didn't give up on the idea. Now, God, as he's done kind of with his people, just like he did with Saul, this is not, again, I want to say, all of this is ultimately God's will, but it was not God's necessarily purpose for his people. If there was a better way to go, there was a better way to go about it, but they didn't. So, not in a building, okay? Well, and remember and here, let's go back to this too. In the tabernacle system, with people not consolidated in a camp in a wilderness, they're over a 90, they're here. There's people up here, over here, over here, over here, over here. There's people everywhere here, right? But what did they do? They build a temple, permanence, a place, right? And now all the things that the tabernacle. Number 2, do we have any instruction on how to build a temple? No. What did we have about the tabernacle? God gave very specific direction. This was huge. Boom, 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 boom. Man comes in. We do it better, bigger, faster. We'll build it bigger, better, stronger. Tabernacle wasn't permanent. Temple was permanent. Who builds the temple eventually? Solomon builds the temple, not David. God actually, I don't want to use the word God. God allowed man to build him a temple. Okay? But he didn't allow David to do it. And here's the funny part about this. Actually, David was kind of I don't want to say he was sulking, but he was kind of like, my daughter, when she was like 1 and a half, we tried to wean her off of the pacifier. Okay? So we got all the pacifiers away. No more pacifier for her. Okay? We were a pacifier couple. We knew at some point, take the pacifier away because you don't want your 5-year-old sucking on a pacifier. So we got all the pacifiers out, and she's doing really well. And on one day, we're in the house, and there's silence. Anytime you have a kid in the house and there's silence and they're not asleep, there's something happening. So we go in her room, and she had dug through her toy box and found the loose pacifier. And she was sitting over in the corner where she thought we couldn't see her. That's David. Because even though he wasn't to build the temple, you know what he went out doing? I'm going to get a few supplies for the temple. I'm gonna go gather a few things to build the temple because he wanted more than anything to build this. He did the design. You know, he kind of was playing that kind of kid that you knew wasn't supposed to be doing something, but he went and did something anyway. That's how big of a deal it was for David. So Solomon builds the temple. All of a sudden, this traveling worship ordained thing that was not permanent, and God wanted to reside, God was with his people, now became a centerpiece of where everybody was to worship. Now, he had the question, can I worship up here, or do I have to worship in Jerusalem? Who brought that point up later on in John? The woman at the well. What'd she say? Yep. So just to give you an indication of the battles that began to happen over where people were to worship, a Samaritan woman, adulteress, even brings up the point that, hey, you Jews say you only can worship in Jerusalem. We've been worshiping on this hill since who had the well that they were with? Jacob is Jacob's well, right? So this is a battle that's going on at Jesus' time, much less at this time, much less with everybody spread out all over here. All of a sudden, all consolidation of all religious power goes into one place, the temple. Correct. Became this central point, focal point of, do we or do we not worship here? And it was all based upon mankind's thoughts, mankind's creation, man's interpretations. And that was Jesus' point. There now is a time in which you will no longer come to Jerusalem or this hill or anyway. You will worship God where you are. It was what God gave to them. Technically speaking, this is what should have been continuing on with them. But they didn't, obviously. So the temple was built under Solomon, and lots of things happened with the temple. And then when the kingdom split, you had people building temples up here, but this still continued until when? When did Solomon's temple end? No. Nebuchadnezzar, 600 BC. That's okay. You're getting close. You're there. So this temple, Solomon's first temple, ended when Nebuchadnezzar finally came in and said, I'm done with you guys. And basically, the funny part was he came in and took some captives first and went away and was pretty cool. Right? Nebuchadnezzar was actually, for a worldwide global dominationist dictator, he was cool. He let them continue on, except that Jehoiakim, or whoever it was kind of a butthead and went to Egypt and said, hey, Egypt, come over here and help us try to get away from Babylonian rule. And when he did that, that's when Nebuchadnezzar came back in and went, all right, you're done. I take it. I'm taking all of it. Taking all your treasures, taking all. In fact, when you get into Daniel, that's what some of the stuff they brought out was some of the stuff from the temple that they had taken when they destroyed the temple back then. Okay? So the first temple now is destroyed. So now they don't have a tabernacle. They're living under captivity, many of them in Babylon. The other ones that are living in Jerusalem are under the rule of Babylon. There is no real established place of worship. So what happens next in the history of a temple? I don't want to say Pat's next, but so Nebuchadnezzar came around. The Assyrians kind of defeated Nebuchadnezzar at this point, and then the Medo-Persians just kind of took it all. Medo-Persians were Cyrus, Xerxes. If you watch the movie 300, I think that was Artaxerxes that was coming in, battling against Greece. So that was the Medo-Persian Empire in the movie 300 that was battling against Spartans at that point. So that the Medo-Persian Empire became the major empire at the time. But what happened under the Medo-Persian Empire that was interesting for the history of the temple? He authorized them to go back and build the temple. And I think they talked about it. Ezra talked about it with Cyrus. And then Xerxes actually let Nehemiah go rebuild the walls. I think that was it. So Ezra goes back, starts rebuilding portions of the temple. Now, is it in the same splendor and grandeur as Solomon's temple? No. It is a very, very bad copy of what it was, and copy would even be a too good of a term. It wasn't much. It was probably some poles. Maybe it could have been a lot tent-like, but at least he built some form of a temple for them to start doing sacrifices again in Jerusalem. Moving forward, so we have this kind of pseudo-temple going on. Nehemiah builds the city. They continue on. At this point, they have a form of a temple, but the Greeks take over. Okay? And remember I talked about history being not good, not bad, but it does establish a lot of things that kind of happened. So what was one of the bad things that Antiochus Epiphanes did to the temple? He went in and offered a pig. Okay? So he goes in, slaughters a pig in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, past the vein, into the Holy of Holies. Desecrates it. Basically, the Greeks' version of rule was you guys are going to, they were the Borg from Star Trek. If you know what the Borg, assimilate. They were, you will assimilate to us and that's it. You're not going to have a culture. You don't get to be Jewish. You don't get to be Syrian or whatever. You have to become Greek. That's where the term, when you see Hellenization was the Greekification of people groups throughout the world. Basically, you had to conform to Greek culture, to Greek language, to Greek teaching. You had to become, for all intents and purposes, Greek. Resistance is futile. Now, the crazy part of that is this. Without Hellenization, does Christianity spread? The Greek language becoming the language of everybody allowed Christianity to actually be spread and texts to be written and to go back with them, right? So, Hellenization, bad, good. Temple, it's bad. Hasmoneans kind of come in and over time they kind of overthrow the Greeks, kick them out, and have that's the Maccabees, and that's that whole section of the Catholic Bible that's we call what was it called, the Apocrypha, which is history of that time. A lot of it is history of that time and what went on, and some amazing things and cool things went on during that time. Leading up to, so this temple thing still kind of exists, and Herod the Great comes and takes over in about 40 BC. Now, what was Herod known for doing? Killing babies, but what is he known for doing? He was a great builder, period. He actually built some things in Rome. He built some things all throughout Galatia. He built things in a lot of places, but one of the places he built was definitely all over this place. And one of the things he started to build was a new temple, back right on the Temple Mount, and it took, well, that was by the time of Jesus, but they never really finished building it. Because what happened in 70 AD? It gone. He out. Okay? History of the temple. So by the time we get to Jesus' time, you have this building. Now it's a pretty elaborate building. It's not quite Solomon's level elaborate, but it's definitely not Ezra's level. This has now kind of come to a point. It's massive. They've got massive boulders and things that when Jesus is talking about when they're walking by it and say, hey, look at this temple. Isn't it amazing? He's with the disciples. What does Jesus say? Time's coming when they're not a stone's going to be on top of each other. And they're like, you're crazy. That's nuts. Look at the size. Who's going to move that? Well, the Romans, when they want to build a road, they want to throw it all down. They want to throw it all down into the middle of the thing. And the other side was they wanted to get all the gold out of it. They wanted to get all the gold out of the temple. And they took all the stones down, crumbled them so they could gather all the gold that was actually inlaid in the temple. That's why not one stone was left on top of another. Most people just kind of come in, set a fire to all the wood, kind of, destroy it, but not really tear it down. There was no reason to tear it down other than profit. Let's talk about profit. Profit was important to them. They destroyed it all the way down to bare nothing, okay? So, yes, to be built by, who knows? A lot of people say it's going to be basically the Antichrist that's actually going to build it. The Antichrist is basically going to build the temple. Yes, he does. So, some things about that are interesting and so forth. All right. I say all that because that's the history of this place that Christ goes into. And that plays, there's a bigger role of something happening here with Jesus than just this instance where he comes in. All right. The Jewish Passover is near and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So let's talk timeline now. After all that history, let's talk timeline. So we've had this, Jesus is called, has been baptized. He went wilderness, 40 days, temptations, some kind of recovery time from that. He goes to see John. John baptizes him. Before the, excuse me, yes. Gets baptized with John. Yeah, that's what I said. No, that's what I said. No, I did say that. That's what I said. I said John baptized, then he went out into the wilderness for 40 days, had temptations, went back to John at this point, and that's when the first disciples followed him. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. He went to John first, had the baptism, went out into the wilderness, then came back, and then that's when Philip, let's see, Andrew and Philip basically at this point began to follow him. Got introduced to Peter, got introduced to James and John. We don't know exactly when all of them, kind of those 6 with Nathaniel, kind of became his disciples at that point, but went to the wedding at Cana. Then went up to Capernaum, and then in this case, the Jewish Passover was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So he went from Capernaum, then he went down to Jerusalem for and they actually say, up to Jerusalem. I do it too. I do it all the time. Went up to Jerusalem with his disciples and with some of the people his entourage around. You didn't travel alone at the time. Okay, this is our timeline. And why did he go to Jerusalem? It's a requirement. Everybody has to go for Passover. Every male, but if you're the male leaving, how many people left their wife, kids? I mean, I don't know. They may have, they may not have. Who knows? But they travel. So at this point, if that's the central focus of where everybody's to go for Passover time, right? And Passover is a celebration of what? Ba-dum-bum. Passover is a celebration of freedom from Egypt, specifically the passing over of the angel of death. This is an important thing in their history. They have the Passover, and then they have the celebration of the festival of the unleavened bread afterwards. So it becomes a Passover week, so there are times where they call the whole thing the Passover. They just call it the Passover, and then the feast of the unleavened bread. But it kind of sometimes all gets wrapped up into one big week, so to speak. A week. I don't know. Especially in their culture. I mean, you had to kind of put some things on hold. And putting life on hold. Right. Well, isn't it Christmas season now? Didn't Christmas season aren't Christmas lights already up? I didn't know this. It's not even Halloween, but Christmas lights are up, right? Yeah, there you go. Yes, between Christmas and New Year specifically. Okay, that's right. So, Jesus is going down here because that's what's required of him. Actually, interesting fact, the other Gospels only really talk about Jesus going to one Passover, which was which one? The other Gospels talk about which Passover that he actually attended. the last one, the one that he was killed on. But they don't really talk about him going to Jerusalem. John actually records him going to Jerusalem 3 times. So, and in this, I don't want to get into this because this one tripped me up for a day, and I said, I'm not going to let it trip me up anymore. John indicates that he went to Jerusalem here and had this confrontation at the temple. The other Gospels record, each one of them record the time he went to the temple and had almost the same confrontation with them in the last week that he was there. So the question is John indicating and just writing this in now, or was this actually the timeline of events, and did he actually go to the temple and cleanse it twice? Okay. That's why. Okay. Here, my problem was I was overthinking this way too much. I was like, well, maybe the writers did, there's two options for it being the same event. That John took the event that happened at the end and just included it here for some reason and wanted to include it here and not at the end. Or the gospel writers included this event then because that was, and we'll find this out soon, this was a triggering event for the Jews. There was a trigger that happened here. The event, Jesus going into the temple, cleansing it, and then saying that, hey, 3 days I'm going to this was a triggering event, actually. This was more important than I think we kind of give it credit for, because we're going to find a couple places where it's going to talk about this. But I put it aside because I said, important people who influence me in terms of teaching, preaching, Josh McCauley, said in their mind say there are 2 specific events. I had to humble myself here at this point and go, I'm overthinking this. I've got good people that I trust that say it's 2 events. I'll go with 2 events. I'm not gonna make a big.
Remember what John said, they write all the things Jesus did.
Books wouldn't be written. Yeah. He did a lot more. And it makes sense that it might have done it twice. And we're going to find that out soon because, like I said, of the triggering event that he caused by doing this. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. He was. Jesus, one of the things one writer put it, Jesus never didn't go to Passover. His whole life, he was at Passover. He was in Jerusalem during the Feast of Passover every year of his life, most likely. I mean, from when he could be there to the end of his life, basically. That was a big part of his life. All right. Now, how were people supposed to sacrifice? What was the purpose of sacrificing in the temple? What were they doing? Why did these people come? So what did they have to do? Okay, what did they have to sacrifice? Or? Come on, you got it. Yes, money you had. Now, what were the sacrifices supposed to be from? Correct. What was it supposed to be like? Okay. What kind of which one of their animals? Their worst animal or their best animal? The very best. All right. Remember when I talked about the fact that this whole thing became very man-centered? If there's something worth doing and man's going to create it, we're going to create profit. We're going to get some profit out of this. We're going to find a way to make some stinking money. Okay? So you have all these people coming from all these lands, and was this the only place that people came from to come to Jerusalem? No. They came from specifically because of, now this is the interesting part, because of Rome taking over the Greek Empire, establishing roads, establishing trades of commerce, establishing a safe way of travel. People from all over the known world, the Roman world, were able to come to Jerusalem now, probably some for the first time, to actually celebrate Passover. All roads lead to Rome, but all roads could get to Jerusalem. So all the Jews that kind of been, and they talk about what the word is diaspora, the spreading of the Jews. That happened with basically Babylon.
Only 10% of the Jews came back.
Only 10% came back. And then, but also the dispersing of them during, the Greek coming in and doing things, and people even separating them. There were Jews that had now spread out all over the world. And now, for some of the first times, they were able to safely come back to Rome, or come back to Jerusalem, and do their celebration and do this. Now, the problem, if I'm in, I'll just say, Capernaum, and I need to bring an ox in that's unblemished to Jerusalem to sacrifice it, how easy was that? And by the time you got it to Jerusalem, how unblemished would it be? Do you see what man had done? One of the things I'm going to say here, the first point here, man had made the temple the center of worship, the only place you could go. So they put an obstacle in the way between man and God. No, but they also established places of other sacrifice. Tabernacle wasn't the only place that they could do this. Yeah. They had priests and temples, and I don't want to say altars in other places, and you could do your sacrifice. You didn't have to come to the tabernacle. In fact, the establishment of coming to Jerusalem was not necessarily something for the Feast of the Passover. That was something sort of man created, not God created. That wasn't something in the law. That's the question. That's what I'm asking. Closest altar, who knows? All we know is this. There were times in which the tabernacle wasn't sitting there because it was, and you would have to do sacrificing. And by the way, once that they came into the land of Israel, that tabernacle wasn't even established in many places. It was just kind of floating and or not even set up in sometimes. So they had created the ability to have different places to do their sacrifices properly. Yes. All over, actually. Because Samuel would, I think it was, Saul was out on the battlefield and wanted to do a sacrifice for it, was waiting for Samuel, because Samuel was the one that was supposed to do it, and couldn't wait. So he did the sacrifice himself. That was the bad part. The bad part wasn't that he was sacrificing out there. The bad part was he didn't let Samuel come do it. Okay. So there was a lot of establishment of sacrifices in other places that were happening. But once the temple got established, boy, this became a central part of kind of the argument. Do you bring it here, or do you do it elsewhere? And now you have the separation of things going on. Worse that, now you have a bunch of people coming in that can't necessarily bring their sacrifice.
So now, you couldn't sacrifice at another altar. You had to go to the temple.
To go to the temple to sacrifice. And what did they have? Just for the... Rabbinic tradition would say the best words. But say, there's the law, the book of the law, the 635 laws that's there, and then there's a whole gambit of iterations, of interpretations, of ways in which people were told to hold to this. And almost 98% of that was man-made. I don't want to say gobbledygook, but that's how you get the, we're going to give here, but not give here. We're going to do this, but we're not going to do this. And all of the different ways in which people would reason this out. So, temple. Somebody coming from Capernaum, Italy, Turkey, they're coming in. Now they have to have a sacrifice, and they can't bring it with them. So what do? You buy it. Okay. And as I now know, when there's the laws of supply and demand, and I don't have any cars on the lot, how much am I charging for my cars right now? A lot. What was the demand at the temple at the time of Passover? And what was the supply? So, and I would say, all of it was not necessarily out of the right heart, but I want to say at least when it started, I would probably say people had at least somewhat innocent intentions. Hey, people are coming from a long way away. They're going to need a sacrifice. I have an available sheep here because I'm a sheep herder in the Jerusalem, Bethlehem area. Hey, would you like to buy my sheep before you go up to Jerusalem? Sure. Here's money for your sheep. They go up, right? So this process starts. So it starts with innocent intentions. But as time goes on, what started out as innocent became a machine. Run by who? Who ran this machine at the temple? Worse. 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 The high priest. The one that's supposed to actually be guarding and shepherding and doing the things. They called it Annas' Bazaar. Annas, because there's Caiaphas and Annas. They called it Annas' Bazaar. That's what they called it. It was price gouging 101.
Well, the first thing you had to do is you had to exchange the money. You could only buy the sacrifices with Jewish money.
Well, no, actually, you could buy the sacrifices with any other money, but you could only pay the temple tax with the temple's money. So there was the other place of extortion. They would come in with money from other places, and those places didn't have the coin that the temple would accept, the gold coin the temple would accept for the temple tax. So I come in with dollars, and I need pounds in England. And there's an exchange rate, right? And there's some legalities behind the exchange rate. Did they have those legalities then? No, that's called extortion. And mafia, that's mob stuff. That's the mob. So the high priest and the people running the temple became the Cosa Nostra, the organized crime. They became something completely different than ever was intended. Okay, now put this into perspective. You've got the temple courtyard, which is the Gentile courtyard, which was the first kind of area. Then you would have a second courtyard on the interior, which was then for Jews only. And then you would go into the actual place where you would have the outer portion where the lampstand was, and then you had the Holy of Holies. That was the kind of the temple area. So this kind of the large area that was called the area of the Gentiles. By the time you got to Jesus' time, this organization had taken, because now they're part of the temple crew, and it's now Annas and the high priest have taken it over, the exchanges started happening inside the temple itself instead of outside or around. Now think about this. How many people do you think were coming to Jerusalem during the time? Yes. Well, how many of those probably were the Gentiles actually selling the stuff? I mean, I'm just saying, because number two, if you were a keeper of the sheep, if you were a keeper of the oxen, were you clean? If you were unclean in Jewish terms. You were keeping of the animals, right? So shepherds were unclean. They considered shepherding an unclean activity. You had to. That's their traditions. Okay. Yes. What I'm trying to get you to imagine is this. How many people are in Jerusalem now at the time of Passover? In a town that probably was 200,000, all of a sudden ballooned to at least 1.5 million, 2 million people overnight, or within a 2-week period of time. How many people need to get their temple sacrifice? What does this place smell like? Beside the blood, beside the killing, because that's even worse. The manure, the bird droppings. I mean, this is a massive, no. Hygiene, no. Number two, is it orderly? Is there any, even if you tried to keep it in some form of order, the order of it is going to be just chaotic. There were, but I'm sorry, you're not going to keep that many people within. They were better than the pagans, but they were more orderly than the pagans, yes. Right. And the commerce that centered around Passover was massive. Okay? We'll get there. I want to just jump there. Not there yet. Okay. So in the temple, he found people selling sheep, cattle, doves, as well as money changers sitting at their table. All of this commerce is going on. Massive amounts of just chaos, smells, things going on, and all in the name of really corruption at this point, because none of it was necessarily, was any of this in real worship towards God? I mean, did people even, I want to say some people probably made the passage in the right order, but by the time you got through this kind of system, if you had the right intentions, do you think your heart was in the right place by the time you got through buying, changing over your money, getting them to finally kill your animal, and then going about your business? What kind of attitude would you have going through? Guys, I got pissed this morning standing in line at Circle K for coffee because it was taking too long. Because two guys had lottery tickets they wanted to change in front of me, and I was mad.
They didn't realize that you're that important.
Right. What I'm saying is, even those with the best of intentions during this time, those with the best of intentions of their heart would be corrupted real easily by this system that's going on. Okay, so after making a whip of cords, how would you get cords? Cords are what? Rope. How easily would it be to find rope in a place where they're selling sheep, ox? Pretty easy. There's going to be rope everywhere. Okay. He drove all of them out of the temple. I'm going to give you the Macaulay moment in my little Macaulay files. Once again, I take a fresh look at the things when I slow down enough to understand the story. It only uses 7 words to describe Jesus' first action. He drove them all out of the temple. Now, in everything that I just told you about, in imagining what this was, in 7 words, it tried to describe Jesus by himself, one person, making this a ghost town. MacArthur, I was listening to John MacArthur on this front, and he goes, I really do believe this was one of Jesus' miracles, that this was allowed to take place from a lot of perspectives. First of all, one man moving thousands of people, animals, money, and so forth, out. It had to be in some form of orderly fashion, because who was waiting in the wings that if there was some form of riot would actually come down and actually make a mess of this thing in a hurry? The Romans are standing outside waiting to do something. So it wasn't in a complete chaotic event where the Romans would have come in and just slaughtered everybody, because they were just waiting for events like this, right? He comes in, makes a whip of cords, goes around, and he's, get out. Everybody get out. Go. Just doing whatever. Kind of miraculous on that front that, A, that happened in an orderly fashion. So the Romans actually didn't kill him. And we'll go to the next end in a second. Yes. Right.
Jesus is one who knows authority. He walks into the room, and when he speaks in such a way that this other hubbub sound, he speaks above that.
Sure.
He speaks above that. And
But he wasn't necessarily talking to soldiers. He wasn't talking to soldiers per se. So Jesus had something. My point is, there was a miracle in just the fact that Jesus was capable and able to do this in this mass chaos of what's going on. He drove them all out of the temple, including the sheep and the cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and knocked over their tables. Then he told those who were selling doves, take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace. That's when his disciples remembered it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. Now, whose house is it? And how did Jesus describe it? My Father's. Do you think he was just upset at this? Do you think it was just this that he's upset about? Is this the only thing that's going on, that's been going on in the temple since the time of the Tabernacle? There's a whole history of the Jewish people taking God's ordained purposes and moving them and moving the goals, doing man-made things, creating man-made ways of doing it. So when he's walking in here and doing this, when he says stop making, he's not just upset at this, he's upset at the whole stinking thing, right? This whole thing is a mess. There was the other point in the beginning. Okay, question. When did God's presence reside in the temple at times? Okay, but the question is, was God's presence residing in the temple then? No. Okay, so there's another one. Yes. So tabernacle, God came down. When they built tabernacle, God's glory would come down as smoke and light up the Holy of Holies, and they would have a signal that God was there just by his presence being there. And then when they would pack back, when it's time to pack up shop, God would basically tell them when it's pack up shop, because why? God's glory would leave the temple, and they'd say, "Great, we left the tabernacle, we're packing up the temple, and we're moving. We're packing up the tabernacle, moving till God tells us to set it down in another place." So God's glory was coming in and out of the tabernacle. When Solomon built his temple, I don't want to say God reluctantly, but God reluctantly brought his presence down into the Holy of Holies and was visible. Cloud would follow them, yes. They would follow the cloud, technically speaking. Okay. Solomon's temple, God's presence did come in there. But who told them, and then when did it leave? Actually, it was Ezekiel. It was Ezekiel. Ezekiel actually talked about when did God's presence leave the temple. And it was Ezekiel who called it, and then it was soon before. Basically, I'm not sure exactly when, and I think it does state when it happened. So I didn't really go down that road because this was just a fleeting thought. I don't say it's a fleeting thought, but it was just a side thought. At some point before the Babylonians came in and took over, God's presence left the temple. Otherwise, Babylonians would not have been able to go into the temple and do anything. That would not have been good. Hey, what's this place? Oh, we're done. Okay, but when the temple was rebuilt and the whole time after that, God's presence never actually came and resided in the Holy of Holies again, which is why Antiochus and Epiphanes would be able to come in and slaughter a pig on it. It's why, who else? What other ruler who was associated with a great ruler actually went into the Holy of Holies and went, "This is it? It's all you got. There ain't no statues. There's no..." Do you know who? This was fun. And again, these are just things because I watched a show on Rome, and it was on Julius Caesar. It was on the Triumvirate. The Triumvirate was Julius Caesar, say Claudius or Commodus, some C word, and then Pompey, Pompey. Pompey in 63 BC went down and did some raiding down into Jerusalem area and actually went into the Holy of Holies in the temple, okay, 63 BC, and literally looked around and went, "Man, you guys don't have a statue? This place is plain. You got nothing in here. This is supposed to be," he's like, "this is supposed to be this great grand thing. This is the temple of the Holy of Holies, and this is all you got?" Because they were Rome. They had all kinds of gods and statues and ornate things, and they had nothing in there other than a couple plates and a lampstand, right? Because that's what God ordained. So interesting that had happened.
Ezekiel 10:18.
Yes.
Then the glory of the Lord moved away from the threshold of the temple and stood under the cherubim. The cherubim lifted up their wings and rose up above the earth while I watched.
Yep. It's Ezekiel. Ezekiel 10:18. That was it. Well, Jesus. Okay. Yes. Yep. The curtain was torn. Yes. Yes. Okay. Now here's the thing. Then the Jewish leaders asked him, "What sign can you show us as authority for doing these things?" So the other miracle part of this is these guys didn't come down and go, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Everybody get back in here and get rid of that guy." They actually questioned him. They let it happen and then went, hey, what are you doing? What authority are you doing this? That's kind of weird too, to me, the fact that they didn't come in and just make a complete travesty of this thing. But my question becomes this: what should they have done? They came in and said, hey, what sign? Their first reaction is, what sign are you showing us? Or why you do these things? What should have been their reaction? What should they have done? If they were true Jews, if they really understood God and what God stood for and what he was, when Jesus came in and exposed what they had done with the temple, what should they have done? Okay, yes. The sign was him doing it. By that sign, what should they have immediately done at that point? Fall on their faces and repent to God for the sins that they had created in establishing something that was never supposed to be established in the first place. This thing was an organized crime mess. It had nothing to do with the worship of God and everything to do with lining their pockets. It had to do everything with money. Yes. All of their actions were, by this point, become so contradictory to the things that God wanted. They should have fallen on their faces in repentance of what it was. And instead, they go, hey, what sign? It's great. Cool thing you did there. What sign are you going to show us? Jesus answered, destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. Okay? Now there's a quote of a quote. What is he referring to, obviously? Himself. His crucifixion, death, and resurrection. That's what he's referring to here. What was their reaction to it? The Jewish leaders said, this sanctuary has been under construction for 46 years. And you're going to rebuild it in 3 days? Now, if you guys remember my story of me in the philosopher's place. Wow, goes a long way. I actually fell victim to that myself. I said, oh, Jesus rebuilt the temple in 3 days. I actually did that in a class before, a long time ago. Yeah, I remember telling that story. Anyway, bad.
It's just amazing that the picture that he's drawing there. What is the temple? The place where God resides.
He now resides in us. We're going to do the short version. I can't believe I thought I was going to go too short, and I had prepared some stuff at the end of this, and I realized I just didn't do that. Okay, but the sanctuary he was speaking was his own body. After he'd been raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, so they believed the scripture and the statements Jesus had made. Pretty important thing there is what revealed it to him finally in the end. After the resurrection, but what event really was the thing that triggered their memories? It's Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit was huge because it brought to mind all these things. And it's the only reason that we can understand these things versus from a human perspective. From a human perspective, what do you mean you're going to build it in 3 days? What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? The other thing I was actually going to bring up, and I'll bring it up and then we'll end. This was a triggering event. I say that because in it's Mark 14. I was going to go there, but we're not going to go into that. Mark 14, Jesus is in front of the Sanhedrin, and what do they bring up to accuse him? They bring in false witnesses to say what? What about him? What did the false witnesses bring as testimony against Jesus to be crucified? He said he's going to destroy the temple and rebuild it without his hands in 3 days. This is a triggering event. The passages in the passages over in the other gospel accounts say, and after these events happened, the Pharisees and Sadducees sought to kill him because he basically desecrated the temple or said he was the same as the temple and things that were going on. This event was so big right here, it became known throughout all the area. Do you know how we know that? Matthew 27. Jesus is hanging on the cross. 2 thieves are around him and the passersby, and it says, all they say is, why don't you go rebuild the temple in 3 days now? That's how they mocked him. Save yourself. And by the way, weren't you the one who said you're going to rebuild the temple in 3 days? Why don't you do that now? So this was a big deal. This was not just a small event that happened that went on and went back. Actually, this became the thing that they used as false witness against Jesus. That became the catalyst event to happen that was used to get him into the crucifixion and get people to do the things that they did. Much bigger than that. All right. I don't know if I figured anything out there. But I had fun doing it. There's something in here that I don't know if I'm going to say I'm missing, but that I think man-made religion. Do we do this? Have we done this? Have you seen any church? I would say Catholic Church for sure. I mean, obviously, they took, the funny part about the Catholic Church was the Catholic Church started out as their history goes back to the apostles. It really does. And then when they make that claim, that is not a false claim. Their structure started as protection of truth by having a bishop who had some kind of relation with an apostle or with an apostle and an apostle. That's how they held truth together, by having the right people at the right places be in charge, so that people that came in and taught wrong things would be put out, and they would hold to the truth. But by the time they got to 300 AD and you got to Constantine, by the time you got to David establishing a temple, what does man do with it? And what do we always do with it? I mean, what have we done with it in denominations? We've done it in denominations. We sit here and we hold this high and we hold this high and we do this and we do this. When all God really wants, at Jerusalem or on this mountain, are you going to worship me? I'm looking for worshipers to worship in spirit and in truth. There's something greater here. And I think because we see it in the story, we miss some of it. There's a bigger story here for us. This is a much bigger story I think we give it credit for. From the standpoint of the triggering event that it caused, the things that's there. But watching Jesus do this and the fact that all this going down was not just one of the more reason why Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus was the one that was to come. This was his house. And by the way, once it's destroyed in 70 AD, Jesus had come, died, resurrected, and now the temple is where? In us, in yourself. God resides in you. All of this great event to show where God is supposed to reside. And that God resides in you. Anyway, let's pray. Father, we thank you. I think that was it. I think you actually answered my prayer there, because this was a journey that my brain was going on. I don't quite know why, but maybe you do. And I thank everybody here for just participating and being a part of it. We've done tremendous damage with our man-made religion. We always have, and we will continue. The amazing thing is you've forgiven us. You've given us a path. You've given us Jesus, your Son, who died, who made the ultimate last sacrifice. No longer do we have to go walk into Annis's bazaar, stand in line, find an animal, get extorted to pay for our sins. You've done it. We love you and thank you for this time in your Son's name. Amen.